up above. It's probably going to be a few minutes until we can get just kind of everybody in here and get everything organized. But yeah. Can you hear me all right, or do I? You sound perfect, quote, and so does Philip. Do I sound echoey or anything? I know sometimes with my headset I do.
I hear you just fine.
Okay. Let me just try something different.
How is that right like that? Is this better, number 2, or the other one? Testing, if you can hear me.
Yeah, the latter sounds a bit better, but it's not a big deal either way.
Okay, I'm probably gonna. Can you still hear me then? Okay, I'm gonna use my headset just because it's so much easier if I've got things that I'm opening up. Hi, Frank. We're just getting started. Quote, do you have a plan? I saw you posted a bunch of things there and like how we wanted to start with the flooding of Altland and the Fort UBP.
Yes, I posted a link now. I'm not sure how to put it in the Jumbotron, actually. Hi, Frank. Hi. Good to see you. I posted a link to the chapter list in the reply section. I don't know how to add it to the nest, but I think maybe we could just. I thought it would be a good idea to start chronologically. It makes it a lot easier to understand the storyline. So I think we could just read a bit from the first chapter called "Before the Bad Times Came," and then after the first couple of sections there, we could move on to how the bad times came, which is about this devastating event from 2193 BCE, which has had a lot of research, a lot of relevant research pop up in the last 20 years, because there's come a huge interest around the collapse of the Akkadian Empire and some sedimentation, which is very revealing around that very year. So I think maybe we could talk a bit about that afterwards. I think the authenticity question has taken up way too much time for OERA Linda readers, so I don't think we should spend all the time on it. But I think maybe here at the very beginning we could deal with it, and then as we move on to the other chapters, we could sort of leave it behind and then discuss the text itself, which I find actually much more interesting. I don't know. What do you think, Baron?
Yeah, that sounds good. Do you want to just try and like time things by chapter, or do you want to read for like 15 minutes or 20 minutes and then discuss, or how do you want to break that up?
I think maybe it would be most beneficial to read the passages where we have something to add, if you know what I mean. There are some sections of the OERA Linda book which is quite nerdy and maybe not so interesting without the context. So I think maybe we should decide on the passages and then try and discuss them as we go along. So if you go to the web page I put in the replies, you can see it says there the full chapter index. And the
I
first
see that. Yeah.
chapter is called Before Bad Times, and the second is called How the Bad Time Came. And I think we could maybe start out by reading just the first three paragraphs of before the bad times came, and then move directly to how the bad time came. Because in the first chapter, there's a lot about the names of different peoples, where they were exactly, on which coasts and parts of Scandinavia, which is maybe doesn't make much sense to many first-time readers. So I think maybe we could skip that and then go to the cataclysm directly. So that would be my suggestion, at least. But anyone
Yeah.
can chime in.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to take a turn to read? Because we've got it all organized with the website, that awesome website. I know Frank, you've read before with the OERA Linda. I don't know, Comates or Eternal or Linda or Anselm or Elise, if anybody wants to read. I know Philip is going to do some reading because I had no idea how many people were coming, so he got voluntold. But if anybody wants to read, just maybe like give me a thumbs up and I can add you as a speaker. Otherwise, I guess we'll just cycle through. Is anybody interested in reading? If you can easily get the chapters up there.
There is actually it's quite interesting that you wanted to do these spaces, Baron, because in the last round of OERA LINDA spaces, where Frank also participated, I believe you actually initiated the idea, but then I think you stepped out of Twitter after that. So it's kind of like picking up where we left.
Yeah. I loved it. Actually, I was just getting into it. It was so great, and then there was a bunch of stuff going on, so I decided to step out for a bit. But I'm hoping I can stick around for this one. Anyways, yeah. If no one else wants to read, do you want to start, Quote Miner, or do you want me to start? I have the website pulled up. I can see that Before Bad Times. I don't know if you wanted me to start or if you wanted to start.
I think it's better when a native speaker reads, to be honest. But yes, so if you can start out, that would be fine.
Sure. Yeah.
Also,
Okay.
I could maybe coach the chapter a little bit, and also the translation. It's an interesting translation. It's a very literal translation made by Frank Pierce, the fourth. He made it all on his own in the 70s and early 80s. And he never found a publisher, I think, because it's only available in this, what do you call it, typewriter script, which he self-published. And I actually found an ad for this translation in an old runestone magazine from the 80s, published by Stephen McNallen, who was in a space recently, also with Frank. And what is peculiar about this translation is that he is aimed at being very literal. He's if you line up the Frisian sentences with the English translation of Frank Pierce, it's as if he has taken it more or less word for word and kept a lot of the Frisian grammar. So I think it's interesting also for English speakers, because Frisian is a root language of English. And as I've been looking into the Frisian, I've been surprised how much of it is actually from English. You know, I'm a Danish speaker, so and German. My German is pretty good, so that was what I would be expecting. But I've been surprised at how many English words there's actually in the text. So and Frank Pierce, he wanted to preserve that. So that's it's not so tidy. The translation is not beautified or eloquent as many others are. It's a bit more, has a bit more edges, but I kind of enjoy that. So I'm excited how, especially Frank perceives it, because in the last round of spaces he had a very good sense for when some translator had been tinkering a bit too much with the text. So that's pretty interesting. Also, maybe I could say with regard to the chapter, let me just find the website. Maybe I should log in on that on the computer. There's an info box at the top of each chapter, which gives a few relevant dates where possible. So, for instance, in this Before the Bad Times, you can see if you click the info box, it says first authored by an unknown writer after the year 2193, because that's when the event was. And then it's written into the book by the graves in 557 BC. And then the events described are taking place in the year 2193. So that's kind of nice to have for each chapter how they are placed, both with regard to the events described, who authored it first, and when it was written into the book. The German translator Harm Menkens spent, I would say, at least 35 years studying the book and translating it into German, and he made some very meticulous chronologies, and that's the one that has been used for this website. So it makes it a lot easier to sort of piece the story together, because in the original editions, or in the way the book came together, the different texts were assembled according to which burghs or fortresses they had belonged to. So they were not chronologically ordered at all, which made it sort of uphill and a battle to piece the story together from the texts. Go ahead, Baron.
Yeah. So this is, I've never read it through in order all the way through, and I think that's going to be really helpful. The thing I like about this site is it just seems well organized, so you can just, it's interactive. You can kind of see all those chapters. You can it's just easy to navigate, and this is what I'm impressed with. So I feel like it's going to be easy for us to break it down and go through these in order. And it's also easy to locate things because of the way that the chapters are set up. So I think this would be a really good option for us to study using this. And if we're interested in seeing another translation of a particular passage, I know that some of us have another translation we could always pull up to compare if we wanted to. As you said, it's not as flowery or ornate or whatever, but I just think this is probably best for this space because it's organized so well, so that when you're joining a Twitter space and you're reading, it's sometimes really nice to be able to have everyone pull up the relevant stuff quite easily just by clicking on the website. So I'm excited for how that's going to pan out. Yeah, so I'll start out whenever we're ready, just discussing how we're going to go about this. But go ahead, Kamontes. If you want to read too, Kamontes, please. Hi, mostly.
Oh yeah, I have a question. Is this the translation of Harm Mencken? Like Code Miner, do you know? Is this because I once listened, there's on YouTube, also in German, those Mencken translations, right?
No, it's not. This is the translation of Frank Pierce. Ham Mencken's translation is he translated into German, but in his book you can find extensive chronologies and person registers and places and tribes are cataloged, and we use those chronologies for placing the different chapters on the timeline. So he was a very meticulous man, Menkens, I believe, and I wouldn't have been able to figure out the timeline without his aids at the back of the German edition. So that to me was a great help. Also because he kept he also kept it like Pierce very literal. And whenever there was something that was not really had an corresponding word in German, he would then leave the Frisian in clamors. So I would recommend any German readers like you, Commandos, to pick up the OERA LINDA Handschriften from the Lühe Verlag, who has also published many other interesting books.
Oh yes, to those I listened. It's especially interesting, those words in brackets you mentioned. They are connected to some old version of German. It's very. I remember that I was in particular struck by those, right? So, but Pierce, did he translate it from Mencken, or did he his own translation?
Jan Ottema, the first translator who translated into Dutch and published the first edition, and was also a classical philologist, so he added actually a lot of research as well, had a great knowledge of the text itself. He had the good sense of making a transcription of the original manuscript and published that along with page for page in the Dutch edition. And in the Sandbach edition, there's also added a transcription of the original Frisian on every second page. And it was from that Frisian transcription that Pierce translated. Pierce, I believe, I'm not sure, but I believe his father or grandfather might have been the president of the German American Cultural Society in New York. So I think the Pierce family, if it's not a pseudonym, the Pierce family might or certainly had a connection to Germany as well. But unfortunately, Pierce, I believe he's dead now. I found some comments he had left on Wayback Machine about 10, 12 years ago. But then I believe he simply uploaded the book to archive.org before he died. But I'm only guessing, but I assume that he is no longer with us, and they actually never got any recognition for his work at all. So that was also a motivation for making the site, to think that he is sitting there for years and working his way through that old Frisian.
This stuff is highly controversial, but my humble opinion on it, I was listening to it years ago, and especially these words. This is not made up. This is there's no way this is made up.
Yes, that's really the great tell is when you start to recognize that root language. Then it becomes obvious that nobody could cook that together. And on a side note regarding the authenticity, Himmler was remained very curious about the book, even in spite of the NSDAP doing a kind of smear campaign on it in the early 30s. And then he commissioned one of the most esteemed German scholars and linguists in ancient Germanic languages and Frisian, and also an editor, I believe, of the great German dictionary, a scholar called Ottema, and he gave him 3 years' time to investigate if the language was pure, because in Himmler's opinion, that was the only way to decide the authenticity. It doesn't really matter how old the paper is. It doesn't really matter if what you would say that it was published, who published it and when, and who had the manuscript, which had been the main attack line for skeptics, let's call them that. And shortly before Ottema died, he sent a telegram to a member of the Aunt Aafjie Society that he had found solid proof of authenticity. So that's very encouraging. But again, as I said in the beginning, OERA Linda Talks often turns into authenticity talks instead. So maybe we should just delve into it, Baron.
Only this is this thing. Like when I heard those words, they struck me as strangely familiar. So this is stuff which is I could relate. This is what I remember the most. These words there, they are very impressed me a lot.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, I was going to let Frank talk. I just wanted to say one quick piece before Frank goes, which is that if everyone could just share this space, if that would be helpful. And also, like, it is authentic. It was written by our people. The only thing up for debate is the dating. Okay, so whether it was written in the 1800 or the 1200 or 2000 BC, to me, it doesn't matter. It was written by our people, and it is our story. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, thanks for the mic. This is very impressive. So I followed the link to the actual OERA Linda reader, but I've been hearing the mention of Frank Pierce. Is that spelled Pierce? Because I cannot locate it on archive.
Yes, it's spelled Pierce, like you said it. I believe if you type Pierce and OERA, then it shows up the original PDF he uploaded.
F.H. Pierce. It comes up as F.H. Pierce.
F.H.?
Yes, F.H. Pierce or Frank Pierce, Frank Pierce.
Okay, all right. I will find it. I'm kind of in the mix, so I don't think I will be able to read. But once I'm located, if we're still doing this, yeah, I'll put my hand up to read.
Yeah, that'd be great. And this is the first time we're getting together for this, and we're going to go through it sort of in order, just to get people oriented with the text itself. So this won't be the only time that we meet.
If you want me to read a chapter, I will do it. Just tell me which one, and I would chime in.
That would be great. I'll start out, and then I'll probably pass it over to either Philip or Comatis or Quote, whoever wants to go next. Is there anything else before we start?
Let's go.
Okay, so I'm pulled up Before Bad Times. And as you read, the info box said, first authored by unknown after 2193 BC, written into the book by the Graves, 551 BC, events described before 2193 BC. Before Bad Times. This stands written upon all bergs. Before the bad time came, was our land the most beautiful in the world. The sun rose higher, and there was seldom frost. On the trees grew nuts, fruits and nuts, which are now lost. Among the grass seeds had we not only barley corn, oats, and rye, but also wheat, which looked like gold, and which one could bake under the sunbeams. Years were not counted, for 1 year was as blithe as another. On the one side were we closed in by Ralda's sea, whereupon no folk but us neither might nor could travel. On the other side we were surrounded by the broad Germany, Twixland, Deutschland, through which Finda's folk could not come because of overly thick forests and overly wild animals. In the Orient, we bordered on the outer end of the East Sea. In the Occident, on the Mediterranean. Thusly, we had about the little streams 12 great, sweet, pure streams, given us by Ralda to keep our land moist and to show our seafaring folk the way to his sea. The banks of these pure streams were nearly altogether beset by our folk, also the fields along the Rhine from one end to the other. Across from the Denmarks and Jutland, we had colonies, lit folk plantings, with a bergmaid. There we got copper and iron, as well as tar, pitch, and some other needs. Across from us, formerly Westland, there we had Britannia with its tin mines. Britannia, that was the land of the exiles who, with the help of their bergmaid, were borne away to keep their bodies. Though so that they should not come back, is first a bee pricked on their foreheads, the murderers with red blood color and other criminals with blue color. About and beyond had our seamen and merchants many workshops in near Greece and Lydia. In Lydia are there the black people. When thus our land was so wide and great, had we many sundry names. Thus that sat to the east were called Jutes. They did not, other than to Judah, scavenge amber. They that sat upon the islands were called Letne, for they most all lived, having been let alone. All beach and shore dwellers, from the Denmarks to the Sandfall, now Scheldt, were Sturar, helmsmen, Sikampar, seafighters, and Angelera, anglers. One called earlier the boat fishers, anglers, who fished only with line and hook, and never with no net. They that sat thence unto near Greece's were simply called Katamar, quay dwellers, for they never travelled by boat. They that sat in the high marches were called Saxmana, for they were always weaponed against wild beasts and Britons gone wild. To those above them had we given the name Landsaton, landsitters, Marsata, marsh sitters, and Holt or Wodsata, wood sitters. I'm going on to the next page.
I think that's fine. That was the whole chapter.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's one. It's always a chapter for one page. I think we kept it that way.
Perfect. Yeah.
I think. How did you find the English, Baron?
There's a little bit of like skippy pieces because I haven't read through this before, and I was just kind of wanting to get like first reading through it. But it's really interesting because I haven't read this piece at all before. So it sounds like it just maybe I'm getting this wrong, but it sounds like it's mapping out all of the white folk, all of our folk across like Europe and where the boundaries are and describing what they were like. That's what I'm thinking is happening there.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, I think you guys were touching on this. I'm very autistic when it comes to reading old manuscripts and very well researched material. So I just downloaded 2 versions of his book off Archive. The first one, very beautiful cover, and it kind of cuts right to the chase in the typed manuscript like Miner was talking about. But this second volume, this has got all these numbers, all the dates that you guys were talking about, and it would have been, once again, I'm just very autistic. I don't like to miss any steps. But in this particular OERA Linda book, translated from the Frisian by this gentleman, the fourth, and it goes right to after the copyright and whatever is done. It's got a nice picture of a lady with some kind of a torch, and it jumps right into the preface. This preface will blow your mind. It's very well done. Personally, I think this guy is English. I think Miner mentioned it might be a pseudonym. It's possible, but I've read so many of the English translators and whatnot. Just kind of like David Irving, he writes like an Englishman, although he speaks like a High German. And so, for whatever it's worth, I'm sensing that he is an Englishman and not a German, but he's breaking down the chapters, sub-chapters, giving some names and translations of other works. And then he talks specifically about the Frisians or the Frias in both the broad and narrow sense. He runs down the Bergs, the BC era 2193 seems to be the farthest back that he goes. Having stuff like this at our fingertips is very important because some of us are extremely autistic when it comes to researching. And so if as we go forward, it could take years for all of us to do this. But if anybody comes across any verification in the process of these timelines, it would do nothing but buttress the case of the OERA Linda book, as well as our knowledge of it. So maybe, Baron, you might want to consider reading this preface at the end of it, or, to try to document the entire work, because it looks like there's two translations that I'm looking at. One was it looked like it's from the hip, and then the secondary one is it's much more professionally done. So thanks. That's all I wanted to say.
Could you send me the preface as well? I would love to read that. The other piece too, I was going to ask, Quote Miner, where do we get these footnotes from? Because I can see on here there's a series of footnotes, but I can't click on them or anything. Are they at the end somewhere, or are they just cut from this?
Where that is actually line numbers. They were added because we have planned
Okay.
we have planned an interlinear reader where you can compare Pier's translation with the original Frisian, and then we might add the Sandberg translation below, so that you line for line can actually follow how each sentence is translated. That's where the Pierce translation shines, I believe, because he keeps the sentence structure of the Frisian to a large extent, so you can actually, as an English speaker, find the words and their meanings. So that's a plan we have upcoming, and then that's why we added the line numbers. Each number they jump each 5 lines, so that when you click on the compare translation, then you can scroll down to the line number you were interested in. So that's why they're there. It's not numbers for footnotes.
Yeah, that's great. That's actually so this website's been going up for, when did you guys get it up, by the way, just out of curiosity? It's fairly new, right?
Yes, Maya the Frian, she's not here. I think maybe it's too late for her, but she set it up, and then we went through the chronology. We both considered the chronology a major, what should you say, obstacle to many OERA Linda readers, because it's you have to read the book a couple of times. before it even sort of makes a coherent timeline. And then we also both found that it was a problem with the Sandbach translation. He translated from the Dutch, and he gave it sort of a, I don't know, Victorian feel, which it's not very true to the original language. So I think many people, they read that and then they got sort of an odd feeling of it not being the ancient text itself. So, and we've thought that Frank Pierce's translation, along with a good chronology, could solve some of those obstacles.
Hey, so Baron, pardon me. I put the direct link to the PDF of the version with the preface, so everybody in the space, you can go to the comment section, or what we ubiquitously call the purple pill, and it's right up there. You can still follow along, even with that version, outside of the website.
All the prefaces are also on the website. If you go to home, and then there's a section with all the prefaces, even the prefaces in the book. So we sort of collected the prefaces. There's also the preface from the later people who added to the book from Adela's descendants, Apollonia, Frettori, Conrad, Viljo, Beden, who wrote a small, let's say, preface to their copying of the work, also Lico and Hido. But there's also the original preface of Ottema, who made the first translation into Dutch, and then Pierce and Sandbach. So they are all collected, the prefaces. They didn't really fit in the timeline or the periods we put up because they're much later. Lico writes his preface in 803 AD. So we thought maybe it would make more sense to collect the prefaces. But if you go to the home or the home of the site, then right below the little intro text, there is the book cover, and then it says prefaces are collected here. And there you can also find, of course, Pierce's original preface to his translation.
Okay, great. Maybe we could end with that. So do we want to read the next chapter, or how do we want to do it?
Yes, let's go to. I think there was something maybe here that might interest maybe interest commenters, because there are some studies that have shown that there's actually a Baltic amber in Crete, found in graves that are estimated to be around 1800 BCE, or even, if I remember correctly, 2000 BCE. And then there's, of course, also mentioned in some of the ancient history writers that they were collecting amber in the north of Europe, and that it was a huge trading item because it had these glow for jewelry, of course, but also because it had electrical capabilities. If you rub amber against fur, it becomes loaded with electric static energy, so you can tell if amber is genuine or not. And that, of course, made it an interesting thing to own and to use as means of trade. So what the Danes were doing was that they would probably collect these, and a lot of Danes, they still do that. It's kind of like a focus thing to just walk along the beach and find amber. I always used to do that as a kid. So it might be something very ancient to look at those heaps on the beach and see if there's a bit of that amber stone that had been thrown up, and they could then collect that, and then they would, of course, get a much better price for it in the Mediterranean, where it wasn't as available. I believe even amber is called elektros or something in Greek, because they had also been fascinated by that thing that you could rub it and then it would become loaded with static electricity. So that's one thing where archaeology has shown relevant confirmation. Another thing is the tin mines in Britain, of course, which is also a known thing from archaeology. And then the copper. What is a bit curious there is that there's no copper mines in Denmark, but there is in Skåne, in Scania. So maybe they have counted southern Sweden to what is here called Denmark's. I think the word they have for Denmark's is actually pine field or pine tree, pine forest. And there's a lot of that in Sweden. So maybe southern Sweden was counted along with Denmark back then. At least there's no copper mines in Denmark as far as I know.
Right, and
And
you were
then
talking about the line of the like I just found that they that sat to the east were called jutes. They did not other than to juta, which is scavenge amber. So that's the story you were telling about that.
yes, it's Jutland. It's sort of the western part of Denmark today, and the Jutlanders were called Juts because they were always, when you try and find amber, you have to go through the, what's it called? The brown seaweeds, and there you have to scavenge, I guess, around to see if there's amber in it. So that's probably how they got that name. And I think all these names are given to the different peoples from the viewpoint of the Frisians. So they would have their main bergs down at what is now Holland, and that's why they had names for the others, but they don't mention their own name, which I guess would be friars. And also the Saxons are mentioned, and the Anglos, of course. So you see that their culture was comprised of also the Letne. There's been speculation that you have that might be the origin of the Letland, at least from the geography. It seemed to fit that would be to the east of the of the what's it called, Eastern Sea, I guess it's called in English. I'm not sure. Go ahead, Baron.
Yeah. I was just going to say, mostly came up and she had her hand up, so I didn't know if she wanted to read. And mostly, do you want to contribute? I saw that you came up and then Quote was speaking, so let me know if you want to come up to speak or read anything. Let us know. Do we want to go to the next chapter, or do we want to continue to kind of like look through each one? I don't know if we want to have the discussion after or after each chapter.
Let's go to the next chapter. That's where the main drama unfolds, and that's also where there's been some really mind-bending discoveries in the later years, which I'm sure we could delve into. So if someone would want to read chapter 2 or 1.2 called How the Bad Times Came, that would be great. It's not long.
Yeah, mostly I saw you come up with your hand up earlier, so I just want to give you a chance to respond. Did you want to speak as well, or did you have something else to share?
I had some technical issues, so thanks. I was just curious about the regions that you were talking about, because I don't think there's not a lot of pine trees in Denmark as where Denmark is now, and it's also not a lot of pine trees in the parts of Sweden that have been Danish. So you have to go pretty far north in Sweden to have a lot of pine trees, or maybe a
Yes,
little bit north at least.
I'm wondering if, given how far back that was, maybe Philip, you know about this, but given how far back that was, would the trees and tree lines would have been different back if this is actually dated back to that time?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of changes to the fauna and all that. You know, if it's 2000 BC, 4,000 years ago, I mean, I think there was like many ice ages between then and now. So a lot of things have changed, probably.
Yeah, of course.
Oh no, ice ages were like 15,000 years ago, even further. The last one was the worm one, right? But you're right. Yeah,
It speaks
it's
of many ice ages since, like, there was speculation about a mini ice age around like 1000 AD, right? You know,
okay,
where they
mini
could
one, yeah,
notice an
yeah.
extreme change in temperature.
Also, I'm not quite sure I remember correctly with the pine and the Tine marks. I might misremember, but I believe there are pine forests in Sweden.
Yeah, but not in the southern parts that have been Danish. But I mean, Sweden was around all of the Baltic Sea was Sweden at some point, you know, a few hundred years ago.
I think also because they might be distinguishing between two types of forests. That might also be the reason for the name. They have this area
Yeah.
they call Twiskland, which is later described as a uninhabitable forest with wild
Where,
animals
where
and
What was the name of it?
Twiskland they call it, and that was sort of a very thick forest that was uninhabitable, and I think maybe
Germany? It says Germany, right?
Siberia,
Well,
maybe.
it says Germany. Germany, Twixland, Deutschland, where Finnish folk could not come because of the overly thick forests and overly wild animals.
yeah, exactly.
Yes, it was occupied or covered with thick forest. That's true. And it was also talking about the rivers I'm always mentioning, right? If you followed that, the Rhine, they mentioned the Rhine and the rivers. People were living at the rivers, right? And roaming along the rivers because of that. It was mentioned there.
Yeah, there are a couple of rivers in Sweden, and Finland is more lakes, but Norway, I mean, the biggest rivers are in Sweden, in middle of Sweden, southern. And it's not too far from what has been Danish territory, or at least Danish outposts and stuff.
In general, the geographical descriptions are, from their point of view, they may not fit our current geographical situation with all these countries and so on, right?
Yeah.
It's a bit different. Keep that in mind.
Of course. Yeah, I was just curious, but yeah, thank you guys.
No, not at all. That's a good question. Yeah, I'm gonna map it. Now that you guys are talking about it, I'm gonna try and go line by line and map it, and I'll send it to you. Quote. I don't know who wants to read the next chapter. Philip, do you want to go ahead and read, or Comontes? Which one of you?
I'll hop down and listen. So
Okay.
thanks.
Oh, you can stay up if you want.
I could try. It's nice and short. So okay, then I'm going to continue. How the bad times came. The whole summer was the sun veiled by the clouds as would she not see the earth. The wind rested in his bags, through which smoke and steam like columns over house and pool stood.
Well, sorry,
right-
Comanches, can I make a short comment before you move on? There's one thing here that's quite interesting for that separates the Pierce translation from all others, which you probably noticed, Comanches. He's translating the gender of the words as well. So the wind is a he, and the son is a she, just like in German, which I find is one of those little things that are very important because, as you know, in Germany, in German, still to this day, you would say, for instance, if your printer is broken, you will say, "My printer is broken. I'm gonna bring him to the repair shop." And then and a translator into English will often then change that into "I'll bring it to the repair shop." And there has been a lot of talk and discussion about the the whether or not Vralda or Uralda was a he. And oftentimes English readers will tend to believe that he's a he because it says he in the translation. But it can just be a grammatical he, just like the wind and the sun. So it's actually a translator that decides that exactly in this instance he's not gonna do as he otherwise would, and replace the him with an it. And then translators like Sandbach and others have chosen to, in that particular instant, keep the he in front of Uralda. So that's one of the things where you can see that it's not without that a translation is also an interpretation to a large extent, and I think Pierce even mentions that in his preface. But go ahead. I just wanted to mention that he is that Frank Pierce is using the gendered language of the original Frisian, which is quite peculiar. Can you go ahead from the start again, Comences?
Okay, I start again then, with that in mind. So, how the bad times came. The whole summer was the sun veiled by the clouds, as would she not see the earth. The wind rested in his back, through which smoke and steam like columns over house and pool stood. The light was thus sad and dim, and in the hearts of the people was never blitheness nor joy. In the midst of this stillness, the earth started to shake as if she were dying. Mountains split from each other to spew fire and flame. Others sank down in her womb, and where she, the earth, first had fields raised, she mountains thereupon. Outland, called Altland by the seamen, sank below, and the wide waves stepped so far over the hill and dale that all were overwhelmed. Many people were buried in the earth, and many who escaped the fire were killed thereafter in the water. Not only in the lands of Finda spewed the mountains fire, but also in Germany. Forests burned after each other, and when the wind came thence away, our land blew full of ash. Streams were changed, and by their mouths came new islands of sand and driven animals. 3 years after the earth thus to suffer. But when she was better, one could see her wounds. Many lands were sunken, others risen out of the sea, and Germany was half bereft of forest. Bands of Finder's folk came who beset the empty places. Our scattered people were destroyed, or they became their thralls. Then was watchfulness stoutly demanded of us, and unity our strongest burg. So that was that chapter. The next one would be the early lore.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack here. Let me see if I can just find one thing. This is the description of the event flooding, drought, volcanic activity, and large forest fires that actually burns half of that immense forest they call Twiskland. So the reason we know that this event took place according to the book in the year 2193 is because in one of the last prefaces of the original copyists of the book, Hido, he mentions both the year in the Christian reckoning and in their reckoning, because all the year numbers in the book are counted from this event. So when this large chunk of their old habitat sunk, they began to count the years from that event. Maybe I could just read that preface, which is written in 1260 AD. So that is many years later. He has been copying the book after it has become wet, and then he writes a short preface to his son, and he says, "Okke, my son, these books must you guard with body and soul. They encompass the history of all of us folk and of all of our forebears. Last year I saved them from a flood as well as thee and thy mother. However, they had become wet, thusly they went rotten afterwards. In order not to lose them, I transcribed them on foreign paper. So wherever thou inheritest them, must thou also copy them. Thy children likewise, so that they may never come away." And then it says, written at Louisvard, that is Leeuwarden today, the largest city in Friesland. Written at Louisvard, the 3,409 and 40th year after Atlant sank. So they had been counting those years in Frisia all the way from that event we just read about in How the Bad Times Came. And then it says beneath that, that is after the Christian reckoning, the 1206 and 50th year. So if we subtract those numbers, we get the exact number for the flooding and drought and volcanic events that are described, and that's why the year 2193 pops off so often in the book. Go ahead, Baron.
Yeah, I was just going to say I could read some key developments that happened in Europe around that time. So just, I know you guys might know all this, but, just to give us some bearings, it's kind of the end of the Neolithic and the beginning of the Bronze Age. There was a lot going on in the Aegean and the Balkans. There's the early stages of metallurgy, use of copper tools. There is in Britain and England huge megalithic monuments, stone circles, burial mounds, Stonehenge. In Central and North Europe, there was in Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania, bronze tools and weapons with that area. The Iberian Peninsula at that point, they were also doing metallurgy and the stone tools. And around 2193 BCE, there was a lot of changes in European settlement patterns and a lot more large, complex communities with trade networks, and especially around the Mediterranean and Southern Europe. So basically, I just wanted to, give a little summary of that, just in case anyone doesn't have their bearings in that history with us. Go ahead, Philip. And you can read next too, Philip, by the way.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I just thought it was convenient because, obviously that chapter describes massive changes to the ecology. And, just before then, someone was asking about why there aren't pine trees in Denmark. And, that chapter would do more than enough to explain that. I also think it's interesting that, I don't know of any scientists who speak of some, volcano or disaster in Europe, in 2000 BC. I just never heard of that. But it it could approximately be in line with the story of the global flood, in biblical history. So I think that's interesting.
It is a big meteorite crater in Nördlingen, that's north of the Alps, close to the Danube. It's a big, huge meteorite. It was coming down there, but I'm not sure if it falls into this time. It could be, right?
There is an immense amount of research around what is called the 4.2K event, BP. It's very interesting. It started because there is a layer which was found in, I believe, Iraq, and then a scholar dated that and made, or a number of scholars, they began to date and investigate and analyze the chemical composition and so on of that layer. And then they, because of all the climate science, they correlated that with a number of other records. And that it was in the mid 80s. And I would like to just read a passage from an old article by a scientist called Marie-Agnès Corti, which deals with this layer that were connected to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, which is around 2200 BC. And there's some interesting things they have found in that layer. I put the image, or just a clipping from her paper, in the reply section, and it says here, further investigations have led us to re-examine the nature and age and causes and effects of the third millennium catastrophe that we first identified as an abrupt climate change dated at 2200 BC. Synchronous to a volcanic event and inferred to have initiated the collapse of the Akkad Empire. Comparison of natural soil sequences and 3rd millennium BC archaeological deposits across northern Syria have allowed us to identify the regional trace of this exceptional event that is represented by a thin dust layer showing great spatial variability due to differences of preservation conditions and non-uniform manifestations. Deposition of the dust layer occurred just after a disruption of surface soils, possibly caused by a shock wave, well documented in archaeological sites, with rapid propagation of a wildfire, and was synchronous with the fallout of black carbon originating from major forest fires in other regions. The event was immediately followed by exceptional heavy rainstorms. So I find this very interesting that in the section we were just reading, the writer mentions that the land was blue, full of ash, and the sunlight was dimmed. And that ash was from the forest fires. So, and the event, the 4.2K event, was completely unknown in the sciences when the OERA LINDA book was first published. There's also a lot of analysis of volcanic glass shards in that same layer that is connected to the 4.2K event. And in the section we just read on how the bad times came, there is also many mentions of volcanic activity. So forest fires, dim sunlight, ashes, and these are not part of any flood myths. I don't believe that volcanoes are mentioned in the flood myths. So that's a very interesting piece of the puzzle, because I cannot fathom how a forger could have known that they would find these volcanic glass and ashes from faraway wildfires in layers in northern Syria. So that's I also have a bunch of other things regarding this 4.2K event. It's a fascinating thing to research. For instance, Harvey Wise, he made from analysis of the different layers, it's possible to determine the extent of human habitation. And in his book, he has spent many years now researching the 4.2K event, because it has always been a riddle within archaeology why the three great empires in the Near East collapsed simultaneously. And I added another graph in the reply section where he have mapped out the extent of habitation in Akkad. And there you can see exactly around the year 2200 BCE, it drops instantly, and then there's no habitation at all. And his explanation for that, all these people have nothing to do with the OERA LINDA book. They are digging around in order to explain things with ancient civilization. But the reason that he proposes that an immense event dimming the sun, resulting in a long drought, would force the Akkadians to abandon their otherwise impressive empire, is because they relied on rain for their agriculture. So if the rain is not there, they have to more or less flee. And they have, in these studies related to the 4.2K events, there's often talk of great migrations as a result of that event. And fascinating to think that that is exactly what the OERA LINDA book is describing. The OERA LINDA book is basically the story of how the Caucasians, let's call them that, came to Europe, or how the Easterners, which they called the Finders, came to the people already, the indigenous Europeans, the Anglo-Saxon Frisian tribes, and the troubles they had in that clash of culture. The Eastern civilizations had a culture of priests and kings, and as we learned from the OERA LINDA book, they had a culture of electing decision makers, and from that also the tradition of the burgmaids, which were counsel to those decision makers. So that's why it's quite interesting to try and imagine how the Finders are fleeing these events, and then because of the burning of the thick forest that is called Tyskland, they can suddenly show up in proximity to the Frisians and Anglos and Saxons. So I have, if people are interested, I have much more material on this 4.2K event and how it will confirms the OERA Linda book. There's also very interesting things from China, which has also reported a flood around that year, and which interestingly was also described as having boiling waters, which also suggests volcanic activity. So they in one of the descriptions in the canon of Yao, it's told that the boiling water just came flooding in. So this must have been cataclysmic. And if anybody can go to the 4.2 Ka event on Wikipedia and just see the maps and start reading on it, it's there's a large scientific consensus about that. So that's really for me the most relevant item when it comes to authenticity. So I like to concentrate on that because if that then proves that the OERA Linda book does contain ancient knowledge, and then it's much more interesting to get to work and read the text itself. Go ahead, Baron.
Yeah, just a couple more pieces from around that time. So around that time, the end of the Old Kingdom in Egypt occurred. So there was a period of stability in Egypt, and that ended around 2190. The collapse, it says, has been linked, and this is well documented, to a combination of factors, including climate change, drought in Egypt. So it'd be different in Europe, of course. Economic difficulties. And then the fall of the Old Kingdom contributed to a period of disunity and instability known as the First Intermediary Period. And that lasted about a century. So that's interesting that the end of the Old Kingdom was occurring in Egypt. There is some documented climate change, environmental stress in the Mediterranean and Near East. And they talked about, I'm looking, widespread cultural changes as well. And this is including Europe. So the cultural changes are different disruptions, volcanic and geological activity, climatic changes, economic disruptions, invasions, apparently the collapse of the early Bronze Age civilizations in Anatolia. So, as well as the decline of the Indus Valley civilization. So, although that's not in Europe, there's a lot of exchange going on to some extent between Indus Valley and Europe, particularly with copper. So, anyways, just some pieces there. But I know we want to get on to reading the next.
Yeah, I would like to add to that to put it into context of time. This is pre-Celtic, right, and pre-Germanic still, 2000 BC. That's Hallstatt culture was about 800 BC, right, 1000 to 800 BC. So here we are 1,000 years earlier. This is a pre-Celtic, pre-Germanic, right? And I just looked up this crater I mentioned in Nördlinger Ries. That is a million years ago, so that's not related. So that was just a quick guess, not correct.
I think there's speculation regarding a crater called Al-Imbinna in Iraq by these researchers who are looking for an asteroid or shower of asteroids being the cause of the 4.2K event. And they have suggested that there might be there's a kind of odd deep sea close to what they believe would be the city of Akkad. And the idea is that this cosmic impact, which is speculated by quite a few scientists, is not fringe at all, could have sort of shaken and given being the catalyst for increased volcanic activity more or less around the globe. I don't know how it works out with the tectonics, but I can imagine that those things can spread from one continent to another if the impact is hard enough. There is even a German researcher called Joachim Seifert who claims to have found a very interesting cuneiform tablet that he has analyzed, and he is a scholar of cuneiform and climatology. And he, from his writings, it seems as if he is thinking that the British Museum is deliberately not letting common sense explanation of this tablet see the light of day. He has found on the tablet a sort of pictogram story of this comet impact by the astrologies of the Sumerians. And from those calculations that can be deduced from the star names of that tablet, which is in the British Museum, he can then go back, because we know the place of the stars and the celestial bodies way back. So he went back and did the astrophysical work of finding what, according to that plate, that cuneiform plate, would have been the time of impact. And he interestingly writes that the meteor impact occurred at 10:56 a.m. on September 22nd, 2193 BC. After the meteor emerged at 5:34 at dawn, and after a flight time of 5 hours and 22 minutes. These numbers can clearly be deduced out of observation data entries on the tablet's pictographic records, and in comparison to length of day tablets for the corresponding Mesopotamian latitude. The K8538 tablet is property of the British Museum. So, and this was to me just that was really amazing that a researcher, obviously very capable. Even because in the OERA LINDA book it said that the sun had been hiding all summer in the passage you just read. And if he then places the impact of the meteor, the sort of the triggering event in northern Syria or Iraq to the 22nd of September, and then at that exact year, then it certainly cannot be a coincidence. And this is then a complete confirmation of the presence of ancient knowledge in the OERA LINDA book. And there is one further interesting thing, namely that only in Frisia was the biblical flood said to be that year, 2193 BC. All other countries had other years for the flood, but in Frisia they had that year, even in almanacs in the 1800s. And back when the 4.2K event was not discovered yet, in the 1930s, that actually used to be an accusation claiming that the forger would have just taken the year from that old almanac. But now when we know there was something going on that very year, it tells a different story, in my opinion, because then it would be obvious why the missionaries in Frisia would choose that year as the name of the biblical flood, because the Frisians were already counting from a huge flood that was that very year. So this again becomes more confirmation that there was a culture in Frisia that had been counting each and every year since 2193 BC. So that's something that to me settles the authenticity question. And that's why I think it would be good to start with that chapter, because then we don't have to look for it everywhere. Go ahead, Philip or Baron.
Oh yeah, well I was ready to read the next chapter, but Baron, go ahead.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say. Is we should probably move on to the next chapter, just because I think it would be important, and I wanted to get to the preface to end this space for sure. So yeah, go ahead, fill up to the next chapter. Do you have it in front of you?
I think maybe the early law is it's a bit of a tough nut to crack. I think as I wrote earlier, I think it might be better to look a little bit at the early legislation they had instead.
Oh, we're not going to do it in order.
Yes, but the early law is sort of very philosophical, it's spiritual teachings, and I think that we should maybe take that in a space of where we have time for it. If you that's why I put. I thought it might be an idea to look into the legislation that were maybe in place before even the flood. That would then be chapter 5, chapter 1.5, because
Starting with
there's
the three principles, and then we'll go
yeah,
back next.
exactly.
Okay, we can do
Yeah,
that. We can start with the three principles,
yeah,
and then go back to, and then the regulations. Philip, why don't you read the three
yeah,
principles and then the regulations? So 1.5 and 1.6, and then the next time we read this, we can go back to the early lore. And I want to end with the preface, actually, because Frank shared that. I thought it was really good to read that to close off.
yeah.
So
That sounds great, Baron.
do you know where you are, Philip, with the three principles, 1.5 and then 1.6?
Well, sure. I just went ahead and found it, so sure. I guess I can read that if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Read both pages.
Okay. 3 principles. Here under are 3 principles whereafter these rules are made. 1. Everyone alike wot that he must have his livelihood, but should anyone withhold his livelihood, so wot one not what he shall do to keep his life. 2. All people of age become driven to beget a child, be that prevented, so wot none what evil may come thereof. 3. Everyone wot that he will live free and unharmed, and that others will also live that way. So, regulations and penalties. In order to be secure, are these rules and regulations made. The folk of Fenda has also rules and regulations, but these are not in the way of the right, but only for the profit of the priests and princes. Thence are their states ever full of strife and murder. 1. Whenever someone has need and he cannot help himself, so must the maids make it known to the graves. Therefore, that a proud Frisian not try to do it himself. 2. Whoso becomes poor because he will not work, he must be driven out of the land, because the lazy and cowardly are sly and ill-meaning. Therefore ought one to ban them. 3. Every young fellow ought to seek a bride, and if he is 25, so ought he have a wife. 4. He who is 25 and has not any, so ought one to ban him from his house. The youth ought to shun him. Takes he then not any, so must one pronounce him dead until he travels out of the land, and here may not give any trouble. 5. If anyone is impotent, then must he declare it, for no one has to fear nor suspect him. 6. If he afterwards practices whoredom, so may he flee. Flees he not, so he is left to the wrack of the betrayed, and none may help him. 7. Whenever anyone has any property, and another likes it so much that he takes it from him, so must he pay it back threefold. Steals he yet again, then he must the 10 mines. If the one stolen from him will forgive him, so may he do that. When it keeps happening again, so may no one give him freedom.
Do we want to read the last one, the rules made for hateful people quote? Because it kind of goes with that.
Sure.
Philip, do you want to continue with this, or?
Sure. Rules made for hateful people. These rules are made for hateful people. 1. Whoso in hasty mood or out of envy breaks another's leg, pokes out an eye or tooth, whatever it may be, so must the offender pay what the aggrieved asks. If he cannot do that, so must he openly have done to him as he did to the other. If he will not stand this, so must he turn himself over to his burgmaid, that he may work in iron or tin mines until the debt be paid, according to the common judgment. 2. If there be anyone found so evil that he fells a Frisian, he must pay with his life. If his burgmaid can help him into the tin mines for all time before he is captured, so may she do that. 3. Wheresoever the accused may prove with recognized witnesses that it happened by accident, he shall be free, but if it happens yet again, so must he indeed to the 10 mines, so that one might therethrough avoid all vengeance and strife.
I'm really interested in this. Earlier in the chapter that we read, they talk about how the tin mines were basically the Britain folks in England area. And what's interesting about that is they talk about bad people, right? With the red mark and the blue mark from the first chapter. Let me grab what exactly it said. So let me read that again. Whoops, I pressed the wrong button. So yeah, the one I read said at the end, where did that go?
Yeah, it said they prick their forehead with
Yes,
a B, a
found it.
red B if
Yeah.
they commit murder, or blue if they're some other kind of criminal.
Right. So
Yeah,
it
it
almost
totally seems
sounds
like the British Isles.
Yeah, it seems like the British Isles were, you've heard of Australia being Britain's place where they send bad people. I get the feel from this that the people in Britain were sent there because they were bad from mainland Europe. And if you think about it, it's an island. So did the European people like send the bad people to Britain? I mean, that's what comes up for me as to like, I don't know. What do you guys make of this? Just pure speculation. I'm just curious. Have you guys thought of this?
They had a penal colony in Britain. So if you were caught breaking the rules, you were sent to work in the mines until your debt was paid off. So that was, I believe, that's also the meaning behind that. If somebody had, for instance, broken a leg of another in a brawl, then the one that had been injured unjustly could demand a price or a recompensation, or he could choose to do the same to him that had done it, so he could break his leg. But if the price he demanded was way too high, then the what do you call it, accused could go to the bergmaid and decide that they should settle it, and they would then, according to the elected judges, come up with a fair compensation, and then the criminal would be sent to earn that by working the tin mines. Tin was a very valuable metal back then, because with just a tenth of the amount of copper, you could make bronze from it. So it was used, I believe, also as a coin. Later in the Burke laws, we see that they have a kind of economic system set up, how they divide, and they almost have a kind of sales tax, I guess you can say. So you're absolutely right that the criminals were sent to work in the tin mines, and then afterwards, if they were banished, they were then tattooed with a bee, which was red if they were murderers and blue if they were criminals, and that was in order for them to be recognized so that they could never return.
And does the B stand for Britannia? I mean, that's interesting. And how they say it was called formerly Westland. Formerly it was called Westland. There we had Britannia with its tin mines. The land of the exiles, with the help of the Burgmaid, were borne away to keep their bodies. Yeah, very, very interesting. And I've been looking at the map, and I'm pretty sure you're like it is definitely the Netherlands. Anyway, go ahead, mostly.
No, I was just thinking about prison islands, but if it's supposed to be mines on there, I don't know. But there are small islands. There's one in the English Channel, for example, and then outside of Denmark. But I didn't catch all of it, so
That also begs the
I took my hand
question,
out.
how did they get there, right? 2000 BC, 2100 BC, boats, like they must have had quite good boats already at that time, if they did it that way. And this
Ice on the
legislation,
winter too. You had
yeah,
thick ice in a lot of these, at
you
least
know,
in
but across the
the water
channel,
between Sweden and Denmark. It was
yeah,
frozen.
okay, that water is also, it doesn't freeze completely. On the other side, between Sweden and Finland, that freezes, but there, not really. There's a Gulf Stream there,
Yeah,
right?
they walked across. There are stories where they walked across in Denmark and Sweden for different assaults.
Mm.
Well, I think it's well known that, like, in very ancient times, there was trade, for tin in the Middle East, like Phoenicians and Egypt and things like that. We know for a fact that they got tin from, and there's still a lot of tin in the British Isles and Wales especially.
I think
Yeah,
they.
but the shipping, how to cross the channel there, right? It's you can't do it only in winter, so that and I
It
don't
says
think that.
in the first chapter we read, it says that they were sailing. Um, there was a passage. It says years were not counted. For 1 year was as blithe as another. On the one side we were enclosed by Walder Sea, whereupon no folk but us neither might nor could travel. So I think they mean by that they were already sailing back
Yeah, they
then.
talk about seamen also in other chapters. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So,
I like
as
reading
an
this in order.
archaeologist, I would look out for the ships there somewhere, right?
Sorry, Countess. I didn't mean to speak
Yeah,
over you.
but we could go on with the chapters a bit.
I think there's a bit of a backstory to those three principles. If it's the only these chapters we're reading now. It's the only chapters in the book that are not really assigned, which is kind of curious. And the reason they are placed so early is because in the following chapter it says that is in the same group of texts, the one called Three Thieves. There it mentions that Freya's maids had come around to him and wrote his name in the eternal book. So that seems to indicate that these texts were written or are about a time where Freya, who I believe was a Berg mother at Friesland, was alive. So these legislations are, in my opinion, rules for the Frisians before the flooding. And from another part of the OERA LINDA book, we learned that Freya invented a way of writing where you would carve into walls, called standskrift. So I believe the kind of paper they had was very fragile and might also, especially in the humid climate in the north, probably not very durable. So Freya came up with an alphabet that was could be carved into walls, where you have the wheel, and then you make you carve the lines of the six-spoke wheel, and then you can, I guess, paint in the letters so that it will stick into the wooden walls. And the reason she did that was because she thought that when a law was good, then it should be written on walls so that all could see it. And Minnow later points out that the principles from where you derive your laws should also be written, if I remember correctly. So that first passage we read, called Three Principles. Principles in Frisian, I believe, is vita. That would mean something like knowns. So it's three knowns, three things that are known. And the first one, everyone alike that he must have his livelihood, but should anyone withhold his livelihood, so what one not what he shall do to keep his life. And the second one, if all people of age become driven to beget a child, be that prevented, so what none what evil may come thereof. And the third one also has the same form. Everyone what that he will live free and unharmed, and that others will also live that way. So those, I believe, is actually the principles that are from which the other laws are derived, the penalties and regulations. And I find that interesting that we have a formulation, such an early formulation of basically freedom, you could say, which is an inherent drive in the Anglo-Saxon and Frisian tribes, as we have seen it unfold throughout history. They seem to make these free societies, which does not naturally have this structure of princes and priests, but more favor that the inhabitants have an influence on the legislation and lawmaking process by electing leaders or electing judges and so on.
I
So
want to say, like, I think this is very different than like Middle Eastern conception. So I study a lot of kind of what do different people tend to do, like what is the generic psychology of different races of people, and I've noticed. I mean, this is how I can even tell who's who on a space before they reveal themselves. Generally, I can tell it's the way the mind is functioning. So I think that morality really comes from our spirit and our mind. And I believe that Aryan and white folk have, a type of morality and way of being in the world. And one of our characteristics that I have noticed is that people have to have a kind of nobility or character that they live by. So they have some kind of principle that they live by, that they feel is right and just, and that they, by extension, will then extend that out onto other people, and they expect to be treated sort of equally in that reciprocity sort of fashion. This is not the case in Asian culture. In Asian culture, there's a hierarchy with regard to a lot of different hierarchies, actually. It's not about character. You're born with a specific way of being. You're a higher structure from being older or, being born into a specific family. The same thing happens in Indian culture. There's castes. You go through different places. Middle Eastern, there's all sorts of different structures, and I would say it's an Aryan principle that it's based off of morality or rightful doing. So these three principles just ring really true for me. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I feel like this is where kind of a lot of our downfall can be too, because we extend this way of being onto people that aren't us, and then they don't treat us the same way back. They would see this as weakness, but amongst each other, it works. Like, it works in a homogenous white society because other white folk operate this way. And when you get a mixed society, it doesn't seem to function quite so well, because we extend this way of being outward. What do you guys think about that?
Is anybody speaking?
Oh shit, Frank, can you not hear me?
Yeah, Frank, Baron was speaking, so if you couldn't hear, I guess you should rejoin. I don't know. But I did want to say something about this, general thing and the concept of law, even, and which is actually quite remarkable in this text, especially for the time period, because a lot of what they're describing reminds me of something like Hammurabi's laws, and actually, if you transport yourself back to that era, like the Hammurabi's law codes were extremely progressive for the era. Um, Most people could not comprehend such a thing. Like even the idea that you should write your laws down so that everyone knows it, so that everyone obeys it, and that's good for the society. That was a new idea in Hammurabi's time. Most people don't have that idea, right? So this text is describing this sort of civilization in Northern Europe that came to these realizations sort of independently, where most people in the world never came to those realizations. And what's also remarkable is the way the Romans described Northern Europeans when they had contact with them. They were completely lawless and, anarchist people. And the first like historically accepted time that people on the British Isles even had a law against murder was around 1200 AD. And even then it didn't count if you just got mad at somebody and you got in a fight in a bar or something and you happened to kill them. You weren't punished for that unless some family member of theirs wanted to get revenge on you. That was the only way. There wasn't an idea of like the state that would enforce laws and punish you, for the good of society. That was even at 1200 AD. That was a new idea for Northern Europeans. But this text is describing it 2000 BC. That's remarkable.
Yeah,
We
Frank,
have
can
an
you? Oh, sorry, just 1 second,
infiltration.
Commences. Just sorry, dear. Frank, can you hear me
Yes.
now? Oh, great.
Somebody is posting stuff in the Jumbotron.
Yeah,
mostly.
I hear you, Baron.
yeah. Go ahead, Commences. I'm just going to remove this stuff from Peach Gobbler.
Yeah, that means we have this guy somewhere around here or with another account. Well, the point to drive home is, again, this is what I'm trying to relay all the time, right? It's in the blood of our people to think this way, and Baron talked about this. Now mentioning Hammurabi again there, it's kind of a downer. But our people think this way. This is a big point there, like 2000 BC, right? This is, and it speaks about a higher culture we had already around, right?
I do think our people act this way. I do think that, I mean, I can see it, and it's, if you look at like things that I mean, I don't even know how to off the cuff quantify that, but if you look at our interpretation of Christianity, for instance, it turns into something similar to this. Whereas you look at like Christianity in other places, it's not like this. And then if you look at like pagan traditions, if you go and look through that, you can see these kind of principles through their ethics. And so I do think it is a white sort of Aryan way of looking at things. And you can see it in our current societies. There's no third world country that is a white country because we
Yeah,
raise
this is
people up, all of
the
our
main
people.
point I'm always making, also with respect to Christianity, is that we imprinted our type of Christianity because of exactly that. It's our people doing it, right? This is one of the most important points I'm always trying to make, right? And this deracinated form is not it, right? Because it's not really us.
There's one thing that really occurred to me that is also popping up again with the Berg laws, which is again from the maid of Friar. She then makes a more complete system of laws, which we could maybe talk about in another space. But they saw a great danger, I believe, in the unmarried man. And I found that very interesting. It says here, he who is 25 and has not, and it says here, every young fellow ought to seek a bride, and if he is 25, so ought he to have a wife. He who is 25 and has not any, so ought one to ban him from his house. The youths ought to shun him. Takes he then not any wife, that is, so must one pronounce him dead until he travels out of the land and here may not give any trouble. That means that the this presence of unmarried men was considered a danger. They were up to no good, because if they did not have if there were no females, they would then be causing trouble. And it was better if they then went and became seafarers or tradesmen from and traveled to the Mediterranean. And in the later laws, it is then added that when a young couple decided to marry, they were monogamous, then the community would build them a house with a plot, small plot of land. And I think they even called that house built for them by the community freedom. I'm not sure of it, but it's just something I've thought about, because there is a formulation where you can actually sell your freedom. And I found this passage interesting. If they considered actually the house that you had been given and the plot of the land that you had been given by the community with to raise a family, that they considered that their freedom. That's a kind of freedom we don't have today, where
Yeah,
everybody
it's
has a mortgage that you have to pay off for 30 years.
yeah, positive eugenics right there already, right? To secure the existence of your people, right? This is right there. This amazing.
Yeah, Joseph, please go ahead. And then I'll had something I wanted to say. Quote. Go ahead, Joseph.
Okay, thank you for being patient. I appreciate that. I wanted to add a few points to that. I think what that quote in the poem about essentially ostracizing the high testosterone male that would be single, because of course they would end up getting violent or restless, or more. And if I think in modern times as well, and this will lead me on to my other point about lawlessness in the UK or the northern hemisphere of Europe. I, if they have this, every young man will have this like social ostracization. They'll be cast out of the village or cast out of the town or the civilization to create their own new civilization, or that's probably the imperialism that comes into it, and also that pressure isn't written per se. It's not like a law. It's a natural order, if you like. And even to this day, there are many things, like I've never had to really even know the law much. I mean, it hasn't impacted me, right? Because my fear is actually social ostracization above anything. So freedom of speech, though in America you have constitutions, but in the UK, because probably it was the establishment of leaving a tyrannical king potentially, as well as starting up your own economy or trade and stuff like that. And of course, it will be a trying country to begin from what it was, right? I couldn't imagine it, but what I'm saying is the laws in England are unwritten in a large proportion, just completely unwritten, that you'll be ostracized, and most people will be they won't give you direct feedback. They'll be polite and they'll be quiet and potentially just stop talking to you if they don't like your mannerisms or the way that you approach certain situations. There's an unwritten rule, an unwritten behavior, a social norm that people adhere to because they fear being outcast. And I think that if you do have an ambition to start a family, that's important. But going further afield, if the village is too small or all the women are married, you know what I mean? It avoids the young causing trouble. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Joseph.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say something, about the basically exiling people, both because they didn't get married and also, say, because they committed some crime. I actually get the impression this is a oddly European thing to do. And in fact, I understand that, prehistoric historians, they've basically figured out that the early Indo-Europeans sort of had this custom where they kicked their child out from the home at a really young age. And they're expected to go and be independent somehow. And that to a large extent explained the massive expansion of the Indo-European people, between like 3 and 4,000 BC. And even to this day, you kind of see it, right? Like European people are more likely to send their kids to boarding school, or, you're unlikely to see multi-generational homes among European people, unlike all other races, right? So that seems like something unique to us, that we're, if someone gets to a certain age and, I don't know, they haven't gotten married or they aren't behaving properly, you want them to go off and, in effect, it means that you're conquering new land, right? But also leave this society alone.
It was probably of practical importance too. You don't want men that don't have a wife to keep them under control. Ouch. Just kidding. All the men
Also,
are
I
going to be pissed at me
think
for that one. Go ahead.
with the whole, it's
I'm going to
interesting
bitterly agree with you. Sorry to interrupt.
with the whole flower power hippie movement. That was an explosion, I believe, of unmarried men who were causing a lot of trouble in the among the more conservative communities. And the youth rebellion of the 70s was started by, what do you call it, bachelors, I guess you say. I don't know if you have the same in Britain and America, but here in Denmark there's a tradition where if you turn 30 and you're unmarried, you used to get pepper for present, and it would sort of be a huge embarrassment that your birthday was all pepper and you would only get pepper. You were called a pepper maid or a pepper swin. And this shaming of people who did not find a wife seems to go way back. And if thinking about it, it's also almost mathematically evident that having a large amount of bachelors who don't have a family running around in your village, I think it will pretty quickly occur to the Bergmaids back then that they were the one causing trouble. They were out late at night. They were the one running after the young girls, trying to impress them and maybe leading the other men astray. So I think there's some ancient wisdom there. That I don't think they were banished in the sense that they could not return, or they were it's just they wouldn't get a house in the village, and they should rather join one of the expeditions of the great steersmen and go on adventure instead of causing trouble at home.
Go ahead,
Absolutely
Joseph.
agree with that.
Yeah.
I meant to do 100, but I had gloves on. I was planing wood, as you do. But yeah, projects. Uh, there's so many read texts with a similar sort of narrative, aren't there, of exploration, and I think that's quite traditional for Northern Europeans to do, really.
Quote minor, do you
Maybe we could read early lore. It talks about how they think how these laws came about, right?
Yes, and I think early law, and especially how it relates to the three wheels, and as you say, their what do you call it, philosophy, I guess you could say, about natural law is I thought we might do that for a separate space because it's pretty complicated, and I think it's better to maybe did we read all the laws, or did we only go did we read the penalties for bastards as well, or am I mistaken?
No, I was going to read that next, actually, and then I thought we could just finish with the laws because there's not too many.
Absolutely.
There's not too many left. Okay, hang on. So, did we read the hateful people? Did we do that?
No, I don't think we read those either, actually, but I'm not sure. Philip, do you remember?
Yeah, we read
The hateful people?
the penalties for. Yeah.
Okay, I'll read the next one. The penalties for bastards. These are the penalties, dooms for bastards. Whoever sticks the red rooster on, burns another's house out of envy, is none of Frias. He is a bastard with bastard blood. If one may find him at the deed, so must one throw him upon the fire, but nowhere shall he be safe from the avenging hand. 2. No true Frisian shall dally or speak ill of the misdeeds of his neighbor. If someone is injurious to himself, though not to be feared by another, so may he judge himself. If he becomes so bad that he becomes threatening, so must one take it to the grave. But if there is anyone who slanders another behind his back instead of doing it by the grave, he is a bastard. In the market must he be bound on a pole, that the young folk may spit on him. Afterwards, one leads him over the frontier, but not to the tin mines, for there is an honor robber, slanderer, also to be feared. 3. Wheresoever there were anyone so bad that he goes and betrays us to the enemy, shows the paths and side paths to approach our refuges, or to slip in at night, him were wrought only out of Finda's blood. Him should one needs burn. The sailors should bring his mother and all his sibs to a far island, there strew his ashes, that no venomous plants may thence grow. The maids must spit out his name in all our states, until no child receives his name, and the old might reproach him. So it seems that their definition of bastard is basically those of us who don't act like us. So basically, those people who betray the folk, because it's like if you are burning another's house out of envy, you're no longer of us, you're a bastard, and of bastard blood, which is interesting. Speaking ill, the misdeeds of the neighbor. The other one is slandering and betraying us to the enemy. So those are kind of the definitions of how to be a bastard, and it seems like it's exchangeable with betrayal. What do you guys make of this?
I think they might have grouped these things together because they hurt the entire community. If most of their houses were built of wood, and in a village it can be extremely dangerous if a house catches fire. So I guess you would jeopardize the whole village, and of course showing the enemy how to attack you is also a betrayal of the whole community. And it's a bit curious, the one about speaking ill. I'm not quite sure how they mean it. If it's sort of creating intrigue with slander and honor robber, that might pit one clan against another in some way. Also, a short remark on the word grave. It's a bit like that was the man who was elected to have responsibility for common things. And I believe the reason Pierce kept a variant of the Grevetman. I believe in English you still have the word a landgrave actually as a person who is maintaining things. It's because that it would be incorrect to translate it with count or duke or something, because those titles are inherited, and these men elected to administer common concerns, they were not. Their title was not inherited. Their family was, if they were became the a grey of the whole village, then I guess their kin were allowed for one generation to have their seal on their shield or something, sort of a symbolic gesture. But there were no inherited titles, and one of the things that becomes very obvious when reading the later parts of the OERA LINDA book is that what we call nobility today were actually graves or elected people that had come to wealth, that betrayed the Frisian community and joined with the Celts or the Gauls. So that's an interesting side note. But I believe that's why when they say by the grave, it's actually the man that is elected to deal with these issues. It's not the grave in the sense of a gravestone or something.
Yeah, I'll just, before I go to Commentator Joseph, grave can mean, you know, a place where it's a burial place. It can mean something really solemn, very serious, or dignified. It can also mean, you know, engraved, like to carve. So it could be relating to what is written. Um, yeah, it could be just a variety of elements for that. What I want to say, just reading.
I'm sorry, Baron. Baron, I'm sorry
Can you hear me?
if I did not. Yes, but I just wanted to interrupt because it's a peculiarity with Pierce's translation that he translates it into grave. The word it's a variant of the English landgrave, which is a rank of nobility.
Yeah.
That is sort of a caretaker of a territory. So he took the original Frisian, I believe, is Grevetman, and in German they say Grafen. In Danish we say Greve. So it has become a title of nobility, but in this case, in the OERA LINDA book, it's an elected caretaker, I guess you could call it.
Okay. Well, what are the meanings in the other languages? Does it have a double meaning or a triple meaning in the other language, in Frisian?
Yes, because this text is so early that the nobility took on these titles. A graf or a greve is like the English count. And it's a nobility title, but in the hereditary nobility system that developed much later. Here, it's basically an elected official. So that's why if somebody is being slandered, he has to. It says here, but if there is any who slanders another behind his back, instead of doing it by the grave, he is a bastard. So if you have a complaint about a person, you should go to the grave, that is the elected official, and complain to him. instead of slandering the other person behind his back and create intrigue. So that's the meaning of the word grave there. It's not a graveyard. It's the elected. It's the man that is sort of an elected decision maker. And if you have a feeling that somebody is doing harm to you, you should take it up with the grave, the elected person. Every 3 years, they would then elect people who had this responsibility. So that was, I believe, a way to avoid people gossiping and slandering and creating intrigue within the village.
Right. I just want to finish the last section of the laws, guys. There's just one more section, and then I'll let you guys go. I know it's Philip, but it's Comates, Joseph, Philip, and Estival. But I'm just going to finish the three thieves, just so we can complete the reading that we're going to do today. So three thieves. War was gone, but need was come in its stead. Now we're here, three persons who each stole a sack of corn from different owners. They were all caught. Now the first owner went and brought the thief before the sheriff. The maid said everywhere that he had done right. The other took the corn off the thief and let him go forth in peace. The maid said he had done well. But the third owner went to the thief's house then. When he now saw there how need had transformed his place, then went he back and came again with a wagon full of necessities, wherewith he drove need from the hearth. Fry's mates had come round to him and wrote his name in the eternal book, the while they had wiped out his sins. It was told to the honored mother, and she let it be known throughout all the land. So that's kind of a little parable there about the three thieves, and that kind of ends that section of chapters, and then it starts. There's just 110, which is Yule's script and numbers, but I don't think that relates to kind of this ethics stuff, and it's something completely different. So I think maybe we could kind of end here. Quote, what do you think? And then we can have a discussion, and maybe read the preface, or we could start with the preface next time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This last story that were carved belongs to those four texts that where it is not written where they stood, in which works they were written onto the walls. So it's a good place to maybe have a small discussion about and then read the preface, as you said.
Okay. So I think it was Comantes, Joseph, Philip, and Estival, and we can let you guys go ahead, and then yeah.
Yeah, to the word graf or grave. Yeah, it's graf. It's what Code Miner says, right? The German word is graf, and in the German version is also used, right? Graf, and compared to graf, there's also a Herzog. And Herzog, the word already says it in German. It's a leader of warriors of an army. That's a elected army guy in those times, right? There was the guy who was for all these local problems and taking care of that. That was the Graf. And then there was a person who was for warring, right? Protecting warring. That's a Herzog. In the word Herzog, there's the word Heer, which means army, and Zog is the hair goes along ahead, right? Herzog, ein Heer zieht vorbei, right? Herzog. These are very ancient words, and yes, nobility claims that later on, right? And first it was elected, yes, true. And the second thing I wanted to say, you can see Völker's thought there, right? Early Völker's thought. It's quite nicely expressed here.
Thanks, Countess. Joseph, go ahead.
That was brilliant. Yeah, very intelligent. Mine's less intelligent. I was just picking up on the word bastard. So it sounds like the present meaning is right bastardization of irresponsibility. So I guess that's where it comes from. That makes a lot of sense. Or a bastard child would be to have a child out of wedlock, or not know the father, right? I'm sure you all know. So it sounds like it's a irresponsible sort of position to take in old terms.
I like how that's a good point, and I like how the word bastard is used here because it's kind of like saying a bastard is somebody without a father, right? In our terminology, but the way they're using it is you're without a people. So if you don't belong to our people, you're of bastard blood. You're no longer of us, and you've been kind of, you know, I guess like taken out of the the sense of belonging. I think it's an interesting way to word that. Go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, well, I thought something was really fascinating about, this line, wheresoever there were anyone so bad that he goes and betrays us to the enemy. Um, that actually is kind of jarring to me, and the whole description of it. It feels really inconsistent with the rest of this whole text, because who is the enemy? Right? I mean, I get the impression when we're reading this that these are people who basically control everything that within their knowledge, and the frontier is just a place where they send, bachelors who are 25 and stuff like that, and it's just kind of like this unknown. There's not a sense that they have some kind of enemy, or especially not like a regular enemy. What does that even mean? And yeah, even the first line of the next chapter said that war was gone. So what do they even mean by an enemy? And then the way it's describing it is you're showing them side paths to approach their refuge. And that's something you do if you're hiding, right? Like who are they hiding from? They make it sound like they're I don't know, like the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars or something. There's some central power that they're opposed to and that they have to hide from. So I just thought that was very bizarre and out of place in general.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, so I can't really say. But I mean, I think every people has enemies. There's not a single person without an enemy. I don't think that has ever existed.
Could it be a kingdom that they're
It
talking
could
about
be
there?
it could be anybody. It could be people who aren't their own people. It could be. I mean, everybody has enemies.
They are talking about their folk, their Völkisch collective, right? This is what this is about. This is the way I see it. And if that's harmed from the outside or the inside, then it's an enemy. And they, of course, govern that. They control their Völkisch collective.
Right. Well, I mean, the implication is that it's some kind of foreigner, right? Because they don't have information of how to approach the refuge and things like that. So uh, and yet you don't see any hint in the rest of this text that they have this hostile foreign entity to deal with. Like they've completely, it just feels out of place to me.
I think sometimes if you're writing something for like say you're writing rules for your own family home, you're not going to be talking about other people, but it's implied that there are other people outside of your family home. So it's just like this is a history, this is a story about a people. It's implied that there are people outside of our areas because in the very beginning they describe the boundaries of our land and where our people live, and then they describe the brown people or the black people, right? And they describe that as being not us. So it's not like they are just thinking, "Oh, we're the only people in the world are us." There's definitely a racial awareness, and that this is our history and this is the story of us, but that there are others outside of our boundaries. So by drawing that map, I think it's implied that there are others outside of our people. Go ahead, quote, and Estival.
Yes, hello, good night. Good, well, it depends where you are. Yeah, about the translation. In Dutch, graaf is indeed account, or in Deutsch, een graaf. And yeah, same word, hertog, herzog. So it's a bit odd that he chose to use the word, because in Dutch, a grave, as in where someone is buried, is een graf. So it's graf, and I know Dutch and Frisian are two separate, distinct languages, but they're closely related. And yeah, so in Frisian, it would those words. I'm not sure if all. I mean, sometimes that it's just a matter of pronunciation, just like sometimes there's just a matter of slight difference in pronunciation between words in Dutch and in German. But this translation is rather odd, I have to say. Anyway, I just wanted to. That's for now. That's my only contribute. The only thing I had to contribute because Quote Minor brought it up. Thanks.
Just to return to what you were talking about, Philip, I just looked up the same passage in the German translation, and they have, instead of refuges, they have the word Fluchtburgen. That is a kind of place that you have made where you can flee. Or so I imagine maybe back then you would go hunting, and then you had different kind of places where you could store things or flee to. In those forests, there were also wild tribes. They basically have two kinds of enemies. They have the more organized Finders with their priests and princes, which has sort of civilized in a way with weaponry and organization, and then they also have the wild tribes living in those woods, and I think those they saw as their main tribes endangering them. But I think maybe that's why the sentence sounds a bit odd with the refuges. They might have been some places they had in the woods, and then if a Frisian would go and tell other people where they could find those places, then that would be considered so evil that they thought that your mother must have had that person with a finder. And that's why it also mentioned that the mother is to be brought to a faraway island. So they would punish the mother for the sins of the son, because they thought if somebody betrays us to our enemies, then it must be the mother's fault as well, because he cannot be of the true friar's blood. So I think that's why the mother is mentioned in these penalties for bastards a few times.
Yeah, the word Fluchtburgen, that's a metaphorical thing, I guess. Refugees is too small for this expression, right? It expresses a castle, a fortification. You flee to that fortification, but used as a metaphor. So to a place where you can defend yourself. This is what is meant, right? They flee to a place where they can defend themselves from the people who would get them, right? This is what's meant there.
Those are all good comments, though. Everybody has such a unique perspective. Um, I really want to end with the preface, and I want to kind of keep it timely too, because I know, quote, I wanted to kind of keep these spaces to like maybe 2.5. I don't want to go much longer than that. I know we started at 5 because it gets long for everyone. So, I don't want to spend too much time, but I would like to end with the preface, and I have it open. Does anyone else have it open? Frank, are you able to read some since you're the one who has shared it? Would you like to read any of it, or is there anyone else who also would like to read in the preface? Okay.
I don't have it currently available, so I don't know.
If you go to the so in the comments it says Baron colon version with preface. I can send it to you. But it is right there. And
Is that the preface from Pierce you're
Yeah.
thinking of, Baron? Yes.
yeah, that's what he
Um,
shared.
It's also on the website. If you go to the home page and then scroll down where it says prefaces collected here, then you can click. There are
okay.
all the names of the prefaces, and then you can, if you click Pierce, it will take you to the Pierce preface.
Yeah, I was gonna just read that, but
I can maybe link that in the purple pill as well. 1 second.
thank you. Yeah, I would like to just read maybe the first page, and then someone else could take the second page, someone else could take the third page and the fourth page, and then we're pretty much, that's it. There's just, other than a short glossary, that's pretty much it.
Go ahead, Baron.
Okay, I'll start. Yeah. Okay, I'll start at the very top. Okay. When the OERA LINDA book first came to light, around the middle of the 19th century, it was attacked forthwith from all quarters and denounced as a fraud. These detractors among the scholarly and journalistic establishment feared the implication of this history, namely that the Teutonic or northern nations did not consist of quaint, backward savages who so remained until their contact with the so-called high civilizations of the south and east, but rather an enlightened, seafaring people whose ethical philosophy and metaphysics show an advanced level of thinking, who were, moreover, the basis of much classical mythology. In the year 1848, Cornelius over to Linden, master shipwright at the Royal Netherlands Dockyards at Helder, near the West Frisian island of Texel, came through his Aunt Aafjie Meylhof into possession of a text or a collection of several writings which had been in the care of his departed grandfather, Andries or de Linden. The works were written in an unusual script, and Cornelius may have studied runes in hope of understanding it. Not being himself a scholar and thus unaware of the possible import of his possession, he waited 19 years to present it to a Dr. Elco Verwijs, Archivist of the Province Friesland, who, seeing that it was written in ancient Frisian, asked the Frisian Society, FRIESCH GENOOTSCHAP, for support in the translation and publication of the writings. This was not granted. Finally, the cause of the OERA LINDA book was taken up by a Dr. J.G. Ottema, who edited, translated the works into Netherlands, and published them in 2 editions, one in 1872 and another in 1876, which is used in this English translation. One factor which weighs heavily in favor of the text's authenticity is that the knowledge of the West Frisian Islands were once part of the mainland is only 80 to 90 years old. Cornelius over to Linden, therefore, could not have had access to this information when he first brought the writings to public attention. Does anyone else want to read that second page? Starting with moreover. Philip, can you take over? Hello?
I am still in the process to make it available to me.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, it took me a while to get back to the space, but yeah, I have
Okay.
it.
Yeah, go ahead. Start
Sure.
with moreover.
Moreover, investigation into the amount of C14 and the growth rings of the ancient bristlecone pine has revealed that the decrease in the amount of the radioactive carbon is not constant as one thought. For some very old tree rings show more C14 than one had expected of them. This has caused a revolution in thinking about early history. The so-called megalithic tombs of North and Western Europe can no longer be understood as imitations of Mediterranean or Near Eastern designs, such as those of Mycenae or Egypt, simply because they are older. Furthermore, it has been demonstrated that there was considerable use of metallurgy on the Danube by at least 4000 BC. In other words, the Northwest rather than the Southeast was the cradle of civilization, if indeed there were such a thing. If, after reading the OERA LINDA book, one examines the concentrations of ancient monuments and tombs in Europe, one shall find that they occur in those lands which are mentioned as once belonged to Freie, and indeed in modern Friesland as well. One must also notice the abrupt gaps in the continuity of these most ancient finds in eastern Britain and in the Low Countries. It seems highly unlikely that people mysteriously chose not to build any tombs or monuments in those areas. It is rather more likely that there were once tombs and monuments there, but that one of the natural disasters mentioned in the OERA LINDA book, such as the sinking of Aldland, overwhelmed the structures in floods. For these sudden absences of tombs and monuments are noticeable mainly in coastal lowlands near or on the southern North Sea. It is clear that there was some connection between the builders of Stonehenge and the Ring of Brogdor in the Orkney Islands, and the people upon whom the OERA LINDA book is based. Their age bears witness to the truth of this book, but they have yet had little else to tell. From the time of Martin Luther, it has been the intention of translators not to produce the greatest possible likeness of the original text, but rather to create new literature based upon the original work. While this may allow the translator to write better, more readable prose, it keeps one from truer understanding of the work at hand. One has indeed little more than secondary literature. This is a great fault of the other translation of the OERA LINDA book by William R. Sandbach, published in 1876. In an attempt to render the text in good, standard modern English, Dr. Sandbach has diluted and, well, has lost the character of these writings, and therewith some of their meaning. Furthermore, there are a number of mistakes in the Sandbach rendering which I, though not undertaking a critique of his work, have noticed. The following is a list of some of these mistakes. And a list is given. The text speaks of Frisians or Freas in both a broad and narrow sense. At first, it is a general name for all those Northern European stock or Freia's children who were confederated under the authority of the Volksmother at Texel. But then, as they became false to the teaching of Freia and thus to the ideas of their own race, the definition of Freias shrank until applied only to those regions which are yet known as Frisian. When the Frisians themselves became corrupt, their name became only a vestige. so as not to impose my own sense upon the writings and thereby risk making the collection a thing of my own creation, I have not tampered with Dr. Ottema's punctuation and capitalization, save to keep the text firm from complete obscurity. The reader might note, for example, that I capitalize Earth only when speaking of the Earth Mother. The grammar might well offend the modern sensibilities with its run-on sentences and compound negatives. I noticed a lot of compound negatives, which I didn't know if it was the translator or the text itself. Such irregularities are attributed to the fact that in 1256, when OERA Linda produced the last translation of his books, at least the Northern European languages were in a state of flux. There was, during the time of OERA Linda, a confluence of dialects and even language. There were no hard, fast standards of grammar and spelling to distinguish proper from improper usage. This resulted in the quickness of linguistic evolution which was experienced in those days. This is further complicated by the want of scribes of that period to modify older texts so that they might be better understood by the public. Hence, mixed texts, those which contain elements of more than one period. Therefore is the relative modernity of many of the references made in this book no cause to doubt the antiquity of its sources.
Thank you, Philip. And Kamantas, did you get to the? I wanted to kind of interrupt Philip there. Did you get to the point where you found it, Kamantas, and you could go through the glossary maybe and give some points, because you'd probably have some really cool things to say about these the glossary terms, actually.
Oh, yes, I have it available now. I just wanted to comment. I love that section about the cradle of civilization is the Northwest. And I told you about that the Messenians actually are styles from the North. This is completely in line with what I said there. I really love this. It's also the picture I have, which formed in my mind. Okay, but I now go on with a short glossary. A short glossary. Burg, a citadel or the city associated with a citadel. Fodic, the perpetually burning lamp. Grave. In this text, a man of high rank in a burg. Croder, the point which turns around the Yule wheel. Round deal, a piece of land which completely encircles a building. Thorpe, small town, village. Wit, wast, have wast, I wat, thou wast, he, she, it wat, we, you, they, wit. Verb to know, probably intransitive, but also used as a transitive verb in this text. Yule, the year cycle as represented by a six-spoked wheel. Now, some major events from the OERA Linda book listed by their Christian dates. BC, 2193, the sinking of the Auckland. We talked about that. 2092, Finns and Magyar in the East Scanland. This is interesting. I like to comment on that later. 2000, Tunis landed on the Phoenician coast. 1630 BC, War of the Burgmaids, Calta and Minerva. 1188 BC, records made of Ulysses at Friersberg. 591, loss of the Danmarks. About circa 320, Alexander the Great brought some friars back from the Punjab. That was it, that section. Now a new one starts, Oki, my son. So, yeah, which thing I wanted to comment on. I lost the train of thought here. Spoke we Finns and Magia. The Finns. I always thought, why are they talking about the Finns? What are these Finns? Finda. I think this is the northern or Slavic tribes, Eastern Slavic tribes. I guess these are the Finns. And the Magyars are the steppe people, the Mongolians, steppe people who approached quite close already. So Finns and Magyars. That would be my interpretation there. And I also, again and again, I try to relay. We always had problems, our people in the West, with the pressure from the East, and it comes through here as well, right? Through all our history, we had this struggle.
Just a second. Come on. This quote, I feel like this next section that I have of this, where it starts with "Okay, my son," looks like it's very long. Do we want to just end here with that, like with the reading portion, and we could start with figuring out where to go the next time?
Yes, I think that's a good
Yes,
idea.
yes. Okay. The next section is the first preface of one of the original copyists. It's from 1256, I believe. So that's one of the Frisians that actually wrote the book. So or copied it and was in that tradition of copying that text all the way back from Adela's commissioning of the book 589 BC. So that is
Yeah.
more part of the original text. The preface we read before was the translator's preface. So I think it would be good to take Hido's and Liko's prefaces another time, and then maybe next time try and dwell into those spiritual aspects, the spiritual teachings, which are extremely fascinating to me, and but quite they're pretty complicated. So I thought it would be better to just have an idea of the what their society was like by going through those early laws as they were, and the principles they based them on, which I believe are from before the great floodings. So there is also very interesting later laws written by Festa, along with the elders and scribes that were at her burg, and they give a more complete picture. It's one of the reasons I find the OERA LINDA book so fascinating is that there is more or less a kind of mixed government. What do you call it? A mixed constitution in the Aristotelian sense going on there, and as Cornelius mentioned, they also have a extremely fascinating idea of sort of proto-natural law, and many things are reminiscent of pre-Socratic philosophy, and there is a kind of trail going there, which is also part of the book in the sense that we will later see Frisians making colonies in Athens and the Ionian Islands, and might have brought some of those moral teachings to Greece, and that might have sort of planted the seeds of some of the pre-Socratic philosophers. So that is my belief, at least. Not a bit in the sense of hanging or anything. It's just more that there is obvious similarities between the early law Heraclitus, Parmenides, and even Thales. So that would be an extremely interesting topic to dig into another time. I really enjoyed this space and everybody's contributions.
Yeah, thank you so much. You're so knowledgeable about a lot of this, and there's so many people that are actually of this period. So I'm super fascinated. I really like learning with other people, and everyone brings their wealth of knowledge to this and their own experiences with this, their own perspectives. So there isn't a group that I'd rather be reading through this stuff with than all of you. I think it would be really good to read maybe the next time. Like, I was thinking maybe not every Friday, but like if this works for you for a day, but like maybe in 2 weeks, like not next week, but the week after that, quote, if that could work, just message me about that. But yeah, if we
Yeah,
could,
absolutely. Friar's Day is a very
yeah,
fitting day for the topic.
yeah, not every week, but like maybe every other week or every third week, we'll figure it out. But I like the way that we're reading it. I love how this is organized in chronology because um for me to understand it truly and to line up to like what was happening, I like that we were able to kind of pull up like the that event that you were discussing, and now I'm like at a point in time where I can kind of go for the next couple weeks looking at that point in time and thinking and doing comparative pieces from other histories, bringing that in. So I love that this is kind of going in order, and I like the way that you've organized it. But yeah, we'll start with, maybe next time we could start with um the early lore and the other part of the early lore, like those sections, and start with some of the spiritual stuff as well. So but yeah, thanks so much for making this time. Is there anything anybody else wants to share? Anybody can come up and talk. I don't know if um any of you guys have heard this before, read this before, or seen it before. Everyone's super quiet. Okay, no problem. Um, yeah, so if everyone's, I don't know, if no one has anything else to say, I guess I can end the space, but I just wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to speak if they had anything to say. I saw, Saxon, that you posted some interesting things. I don't know if you wanted to come up. I was just going to read what Saxon wrote. He said that there's a review that lends a further support to early proposals that the declines or disruptions of ancient Egyptian culture, Mesopotamian culture, and ancient Indian culture at 4.2 KABP were associated with the 4.2 KA event. He also said that the Mohenjo-Daro event also simply confirms an atmospheric catastrophe that devastated Earth at that time period. And then he posted a couple things there. So if you wanted to come up and speak to that, Saxon, you could. Otherwise, maybe next time you could read or come up.
Well, I did check the Wikipedia, like the guy was saying, and it was interesting. The Wikipedia article suggests kind of that Europe was not affected all that much, and a lot of scientists would kind of say that it was regional. It was mainly the Near East that was affected by it, and not so much Europe. But I don't know. That's just what Wikipedia said.
Yeah, well, I mean, history sort of isn't always all that accurate. It's like what we know of it. I think, was there, I mean, one thing that strikes me from this is that there was this sort of sense of diminishing the Europeans, like the Western Northern Europeans that most of us are, and this kind of magnification of like Rome. Um, how much of our history was really written by the Romans, and pretty much all of it, right?
there's evidence for a lot of the worship places of worship by the Romans to take on deities from various religions. So generally in their empire, the way that they grew so large was essentially using different deities that local tribes would and folk would already hold to a high regard in order to create a kind of like a unity in some way like this. So a lot of the things that the Romans claim were actually just inherited.
Well, if you look at like their whole pantheon, it's all inherited. It's like they took all the Greeks stuff and just copy their gods. I mean, that's pretty obvious. Yeah, I mean, I feel like when, but a lot of our history is written by those people, so it's kind of like, well, Wikipedia says one thing, but I don't believe it. So I guess reading through this stuff, it's sort of like, it really strikes me as very interesting, for sure.
Yeah,
Well,
and
I mean, I
they,
think it's open to speculation, and there's definitely, we know there's a lot we don't know because, you know, archaeologists only kind of recently discovered things like Skara Brae and Stonehenge and the Rings of Brogdar and how old they actually were, and they were actually kind of blown away at how old they were. It doesn't really fit into their version of history, but we also know that the only, you know, of course, the Romans wrote our history because we don't have any other source. It just doesn't exist. And, you know, most people would say the easiest explanation for that is that we just didn't have writing. But I suppose it's not impossible that there was stuff that was deliberately destroyed by people who wanted to erase our history, as Christians tended to do, right? So it's open to speculation.
what it also does, it brings the focus back. Like all these historians digging around there in the East are focused on that, and then they try to relate that to us. And what we have here is no, we also developed our stuff here. Our people also developed things, right? And more and more, the more I learn about it, the more this picture emerges, right? So there's this twist, this, in my opinion, false twist. Yes, culture over there also developed pretty early because they had these cities there, Ur and Uruk and stuff. But also, it also developed here in our lands, right? We also did that, but in a different way. And this puts back the focus more on us, right? And this view of history is quite distorted that way, or was. So we have to kind of come back to look at what did we do here, right? And this is a big thing, right? Because this dislodging effect this other stuff has, right?
Absolutely. And what you said, Commandos, about carbon data, the carbon data was we can determine a date on average, roughly about 9,000 years, blue eyes, blonde hair, in uh, what around 9,000 to 8,000 years in Cheddar Gorge, Cheddar Cave. But of course, you can't determine the melanin in the skin without a tissue sample. But it was a skeleton, but you can determine the DNA markers, therefore the eye color and hair color. And in various places, including China, where in the east, is it West China? There's a desert where it was perfectly preserved with a pair of trousers. So they determined that they were riding horses around about 5,000 years ago. And in the south, oh, South America is very fascinating, and there's a lot going on there. But even in North um, America, there's 4,500-year-old green-eyed, red hair mummies as well. Very fascinating.
Go ahead, Saxon. You came up. I'd be interested in your opinion. You posted some interesting things in the comment section.
Thanks, Quote. I just briefly wanted to remark on it. I'm outside right now stacking wood and trying to post this stuff as well. But I just want, for everyone who's not familiar with this time period, this was during the Bronze Age collapse that a lot of historians say, we just don't know what caused it. We don't know what happened. We don't know why all these great civilizations from the past just went away. And I think the OERA Linda kind of gives, like the smoking gun, like, look, this is when it happened. This is what we did. And that would be the only account of what happened during that time. And that's pretty much all I got to add to that right now.
I have a little something to add regarding this old claim of northwestern European illiteracy. As Ottema mentions in his preface to the first Dutch edition, as he saw the alphabet page, he immediately remembered a passage from Julius Caesar's work, the Gallic Wars, and the reason why that is that passage in Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars more or less proves that there were Northern European literacy and that the Germanic tribes were highly literate. That book was written around 50 BCE, and there, without any surprise, Julius Caesar mentions that in the camp of the Helvetii, that would be, this is Swiss, a Germanic tribe, there they found, after conquest, lists in their camp of 368,000 people. And on those lists, the Helvetii had catalogued names, guild, family, tribe, and so on, meticulously. And aside from that, Julius Caesar also mentions the writings of the Druids and the Celts. He even says that the Druids could write in more than one language, I believe. And another interesting argument is that, for instance, Claus Arminius, the leader of the Teutonic tribe, he was trained in the Roman army, and would it not be absurd to think that it would not occur to him that they used small signs on paper to administer things and logistics and so on? So this is obviously an invention of the priests, that the tribes conquered by Charlemagne were to simply believe that they did not have a cultured past. And what is also fascinating is that if you look at a map of Europe, I believe it's pretty much agreed upon now that Marseille was even in 1200 or even further, according to some 1800 BCE, was already a trading colony of the Mediterranean, of course literate, and Marseille is at the end of the Rhone River, so of course people would travel from Lyon and down to Marseille by the river, and they would then trade further north along the Rhine, and how would it not occur to people in Belgium or the Netherlands that they were using writing further south? This is such an absurd claim that I cannot really understand how it still to this day can be maintained. Even here on Twitter, we sometimes see people claiming that Northern Europeans were just dancing around bonfires and eating meat and drinking meat and not much else. The runic script, the Futhark, I believe up until 800 AD or something, we don't really have any more than 2-3 sentences pieced together in runic script. So this and those Futhark are of Eastern origin anyway. So there has been this doctrine, I guess you can say, within academia for a good 1,000 years that all had to come from the East. Ex Oriente Lux, they call it, the light from the East. The sun rises in the East. And we even see that I was in a space recently where we were discussing genetics. And I was curious, of course, about these tribes that are mentioned here in the OERA LINDA book, the indigenous European tribes that were not of steppe origin. And I found that people almost was finding it peculiar that I would ask about that, because it's all about the great steppe herders coming in and taking over. So there, even in the genetics section, there's a bit of Stockholm syndrome going on, which I try and occasionally push back against. There were indeed Anglo-Frisian Saxon tribes here that were there for thousands of years before the steppe herders came. And I don't believe that it was the people of the OERA LINDA that built the Stonehenge and so on. That must have been those early European farmer cultures, which might have mixed with the Western hunter-gatherers and then have become what is here described as Friends, because they don't mention anything about the Stonehenge or the meaning of it, and surely they would if they had built it. So it's not too kang about the Stonehenge. That is still a mystery, but it is, I think, important today to remain true to the fact that there is this Western European indigenous people that has had their own culture, and that culture was centered not around priests and kings, but more around community and the election of leadership on the basis of merit, and where everybody had their say in some sense or another.
I think that's a really important point. Before I go to Comontis and Saxon, I just want to say, like, that is the biggest piece that I'm taking from this is, if you think about it logically, if even, okay, we didn't have a lot of writing, but there was an oral society, and why would writing be important as much to our people when our people are more interested in their word? If you see, a culture or a group of people where your word is more important, it says a lot. If you're an honor-based society, and it's about your word individually and your individual honor, writing it down removes the validity from the speaker. So if you just look at, the ontology of that, like, how do we, the etymology of truth, right? So if you are a speaker of truth, if you write something down, who knows whether or not that is true, because are you an honorable person or not? So if you have a culture of honor, if you have a group of people that is based on honor and being a noble person, the spoken word has a lot more sway, because the person speaking it is an honorable person, therefore they stand by their word. So if you look at it that way, it kind of all makes sense that we wouldn't even have cared as much about writing things as much as we would about speaking to each other's faces, because we afford that honor from ourselves and our own behavior onto the person that we're interacting with. So to write it down removes, that layer of certainty that the person speaking the words is an honorable person. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it does to me. And I feel like, obviously, everybody's going to develop writing and all of that, but to some extent, I think it makes sense that our people would naturally want to know who is speaking words. And perhaps an oral tradition lends itself more to that than a written tradition. Go ahead, Joseph, Comates, and Saxon.
I'll keep it really brief because I only just put my hand up. But yeah, I think it's to quote Miner's point, it seems like the indoctrination is to lessen the value. They know that we would be very an informed people is very powerful, and what we've created in the last 1,000 years, just for that alone, let alone the rest of time, is astonishing. Even to, looking back on it. So, in order to indoctrinate this idea of dancing around the fire to kind of demean our people and our capabilities towards an out of Africa theory, as opposed to the obvious and evident, based on all the archaeology and anthropology that I've looked at, of many different human species. You could call them human. Many different species of ad hominins walking and cohabiting. It's there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to see. It's obviously not in the mainstream academic field, but you could probably do some digging and find it in libraries, and it's amazing what's out there, really.
Yes, we know now out of Africa is very faulty. There's a lot of other stuff very faulty. And how our people organized the amber trading routes, very ancient ones, around that time period already. The OERA Linda talks about amber trade, right? Amber stuff. All to organize that, you need a form of structure and high developed structure and organization and communication, of course. And yes, what Baron says, a trust society, not so much on the written word, but they must have had also something there to signal, to document, right? Who knows what's hidden from us, right, in order for that mainstream narrative, but the evidence is harder and harder. And if I add to this genetic evidence, the R1B, R1A stuff, right, mitochondrial DNA, motherly DNA, and connect this to the Ice Age, the picture emerging is very solid. Our people have been sitting there in the West all the time since the Ice Ages, and R1A and R1B, we are the R1Bs, are existing at all because of the separation due to the ice shield, which happened, right? The very existence of these two tribes is connected to that, and from that you can already infer we were sitting in our lands all the time already. Okay, then everybody moved up again, and we spread and they spread, and some mixing stuff occurred, right? But this is the way it happened. And not everybody from the East came over. This is, I guess, a wrong narrative, right? And it here, what we are looking at here, fosters what I just said, right?
I would really like to have your input on the chapters that describe the story of Rodin, Comanches, because I would be interested in how you see that mapping out those archaeogenetic studies that have become much more available in recent years. Especially this odd fact that the coded ware was R1A, I believe, and of course the bell beaker on the other side, or is it the Hallstatt? I'm not really that much into these things, but it does fit well with the claims of the OERA LINDA book that huge forest they call Twiskland did separate those two tribes.
Yeah, these corded ware cultures, they are a little bit misleading, because what happened is when the ice was receding, our people went up, or we as R1Bs went upward, and the R1As also went upward, right? And then stuff happened there. There was it was closer to the ice, receding ice. It was tundra all over from our North Sea to the North Sea wasn't there yet, right? From Britain all over to almost China, it was all tundra, right? The people could roam freely there, and in that environment, the corded ware culture started to exist, and it was spreading in both R1As and R1Bs, right? So this to take these corded ware culture things as they are those people and they are those people is a little bit, you have to be careful with that because of what I just mentioned. But at least this is the way I look at it.
I also think that it's sometimes misunderstood the significance of the genetics, because it's I think actually the culture that is making a selection. In every culture there's a kind of built-in eugenics which favors a character, so to speak, and I think the society that is described in the OERA LINDA book is a selective process with the monogamy and the banishments and so on. It's obviously also has eugenic consequences. So sometimes people think
much more than that, coal miner. Much more than that. It's very heavy positive eugenics. They are expressing there, right?
Yeah, so it's not actually in these groups are recognizable in the genetic code, but it was the culture that created what should we say their kind comes from the culture, I would say.
No. It's the similarity of it's the blood. The people are alike, and they think alike, right? And from that follows the culture. They develop a similar culture that way. The people around there, they all have the same spirit, so to say, coming from their
there is a
being,
feedback.
right?
I think what Quoteline is speaking about is something like, if you have a culture, if you have something that has a pressure on your reproduction and it lasts for 300 years, it's going to change who you are, right, through this sort of eugenic process. And I mean, as far as like, I studied the DNA of all these ancient migrations, so the OERA LINDA book would be written about 1,000 years after the corded ware and bell beaker migrations. And I think scientists have basically determined that the corded ware migration definitely sort of came from Ukraine, was basically the same kind of people as the Yamnaya. Whereas the bell beaker people, it's a little bit more of a mystery. They actually don't know. And they do know, though, that the bell beaker people genetically are very different from the corded ware people. They've gotten samples of ancient DNA from both of those people, and they're very different. So, yeah, it's interesting. Unfortunately, there's still a lot we don't know, but we do know bell beaker is not the same people as corded ware.
Okay,
The corded
yes.
ware though was like later than that, or earlier than when were you saying it was? Because I was just reading about that recently, and
Yeah,
it was saying that it was similar to like right around 2190 BCE that there were the corded ware people were.
I guess a little bit earlier.
It was around 3,000.
Earlier, I
Around
guess.
3,000.
Well, I read that it was
Yeah,
still in
from like
existence at this
3,000
time. I
BC.
was just looked it up just when we were reading because I was looking at the dating, and it was saying that that was a society that was still going at that time.
Corded ware is Neolithic, I guess. It's not Bronze Age yet. And the Yamnaya and all of those are R1As, right? And we are dominantly R1Bs over here. So
I just found it. It says the corded ware culture around 2000 BCE, much of northern and central Europe was occupied by groups associated with the corded ware culture, also known as the battle axe culture. The people of this culture were likely Proto-Indo-European or early Indo-European speakers and have often been linked to Germanic, Baltic, or other Indo-European groups characterized by their distinctive pottery, decorated with cord impressions, and their burial practices, which included single graves, often with a corded pattern on the pottery or tools, and the use of battle axes. The evidence the corded ware culture left behind numerous burial mounds, settlements, and artifacts such as pottery, tool, and weapons. This culture is generally considered to be a precursor to the later Germanic peoples, although at this time the people were in still early stages of differentiation into distinct Indo-European groups.
yeah, too much information at once.
Sorry.
The important point is not bronze. They still used large tools like stone tools, right? And
Yeah, and I think the corded ware, they started their invasion of Europe around 3000 BC. And there were already people in Europe at that time, and the corded ware kind of came through, and there was a large genetic replacement that occurred. Yeah, that was a big DNA impact, especially on Eastern and Central Europe. The point I was making is that around the same time, you also had the bell beaker culture, which was further west, and they were definitely totally different people, and no one really knows where the bell beaker came from.
Well,
We're
they
not
didn't
supposed
come
to
from
know
anywhere. They
Philip.
didn't come just as they didn't come from anywhere. They were just there, right? They were our people from what I'm trying to relay from the Ice Age on R1As.
Go ahead, Saxon.
Sorry, R1Bs, not R1As. R1Bs, right?
Right.
Just R1Bs.
Yeah, R1Bs. I was just going to say, if we knew more about Doggerland and we did more archaeology there, you know, even though it would be extremely hard, I think it would put a lot of this to rest because I think Bell Beaker originated in Doggerland. Any thoughts on that, Commentus?
It could be. I believe, for example, that people settled along the rivers, right? And Doggerland, the Rhine had a delta in the middle of the channel. And that delta region must have been occupied with a lot of people at that time, for that time.
And the thing is, if you think about it, there is no archaeologists are talking about Doggerland anymore. It's been kind of swept under the rug, but I think it has a very significant, I don't know, importance to our history. You know that predates the Bronze Age. Obviously, goes back to the Stone Age. But I think there's probably artifacts there that if we really went into it, we'd be able to explain our origin a lot clearer.
I'm probably gonna have to close out now, Baron, but I would like to mention here towards the end that I'm thinking about setting up a kind of group. I think it's called a group chat or community or whatever for people, for OERA Linda readers. And if anybody is interested in being a member of such a chat, just with updates for future spaces or what have you, trying to keep it sort of aiming for a literal interpretation and maybe some of those archaeological finds or the sciences that are related to it. You can just shoot me a DM and say, add me to the group or whatever, and then I will set up such a group chat if there's interest for it.
Yes.
I really enjoyed the space, and I'm looking forward to future spaces. The genetic thing is also a huge topic, which I could learn much from more about. So that would also be interesting, especially if we connect it to the chapter that concerns Woden and his encounter with the Finders. That would be the R1As and the Magyars, which is a priest culture. And that whole encounter could be a description of the clash between R1As and R1Bs and all the things we know from recent scientific studies. Overall, I would say the Orlinda comes out pretty well in terms of fitting with the tribes and their movements in an astonishing way when comparing these recent archaeogenetic studies with the story in the Orlinda. And it is a hard realization that we were conquered by Caucasians, so to speak. That as an Anglo or a person from the Danemarks, that is something I have to live with, I guess. Anyway, I really enjoyed the space, and I'm looking forward to future spaces. And thanks for having me up.
Of course, thank you. I wouldn't have done it without you, quote. So definitely add me to the group. I'm going to close the space now because it's I got to get going. But I wanted to thank everybody listening, everybody who came up to speak, and I'm going to leave this space just on my page as well. So if you know anybody who wants to join the group, you can just kind of message quote, or you can just go on my page and just write on there, add me to the group kind of thing, and we'll be able to read it. Thank you so much, quote. I know it's super late, so good night to everybody, and take care. Thanks.